Our lives depend heavily on energy of whatever kind. So if we only look at the events in Ukraine, it's easy to see that oil and gas continues to play a huge role in the energy mix. And for the foreseeable future, we need more of it and not less. So before Claude continues with the program, I'd like to ask an honored guest to say a few words, and offer our meal prayer. There is likely not a more appropriate person to do this and to pray to the Almighty for all of us other than Wayne Christian. Wayne Christian. Thanks, Wayne. And there he is. I'm giving him 2 minutes.
That's besides as a prayer, okay?
That's not including the prayer.
Yeah, and I wouldn't dare campaign for you here, but we do have a runoff on May 24th. And the only thing I can promise you, my campaign promise, you will not see me with my shirt off sitting on a pump jack. If you don't know about it, you can ask your neighbor, okay? It is exciting to be here and exciting to see the good folks of East Texas that represent all over the nation what oil and gas is doing. And like I always, Todd Staples always says, never let a crisis go to waste, right? And the Ukraine is a terrible crisis, but I think when you have Nancy Pelosi voting to increase production of oil, that is a historical moment in time, right? And that's what we see before us. It's amazing. A book called The Prize, many of you may be familiar with, talks about since 1850, every major international crisis comes from access to energy. And when you think we just lived through an administration for the first time in 70 years that energy became dominant, Texas, if we were a nation, would be number 3 in production. And during that 4 years, we didn't enter a new international skirmish for the first time in almost a century. That ain't just maybe. There's a reason for that. Barack Obama's number 3 advisor told us at one Energy Council that definitely we were missing the point to teach America the value of oil and gas when we didn't use national security. That these suburban moms and dads needed to know that it was oil and gas that would keep their young ones from having to go overseas and risk their lives. And that's what we saw. And a year after we lost that energy dominance, guess what happened in the world? It's a sad, scary time. But the good news is, starting back in 1917, the greatest oil discovery, one of the greatest, was up in Eastland County, the Ranger Field. And after World War I, there was a letter came back from the European Conference that says, we want to thank Texas for a wave of oil that helped win World War I. Then World War II came along. The Big Inch and Little Inch pipeline out of Kilgore, Texas, provided 80% of the oil and gas to our forces, for the Allied forces. And at the end of that, Winston Churchill quoted, "We won the war on a sea of oil from East Texas." Ladies and gentlemen, for the 3rd time in history, America in West Texas has been given the largest discovery in history. I just pray the folks like you this morning that will awaken and decide we're going to be like our previous generation, and we want to be called the greatest generation as they were. That's the responsibility and opportunity the good Lord has given us at this time in our lives for our children and grandchildren. And I think it's time with this terrible happening in the world for us to wake up and start implementing our beliefs strongly. In other words, put on our big boy and girl britches and go out and drill, baby, drill, right? Would you please join me in a word of prayer? Being the only Christian on the ballot on May 24th, they've asked me to return them. Father, we thank you this morning for the opportunity we have to join together. You have blessed this country. You have blessed this audience. You've blessed all of us that we're here, not worried about whether we're going to have heat or cold, but where we can decide what degree we want the cold or hot to be. We no longer have starvation that we look at in this country and a large part of the world. Because, Father, you've given us the oil and gas to let us be able to raise the crops and grow food, and now, if anything, we have to watch how much we eat. Father, we just thank you for the blessings our country has and ask you to awaken us to know that we as a people need to step forth and stand for and defend what you have blessed us with, and that's the natural resources in this earth that you've granted more in this state than any other place on planet Earth. We praise you for that and ask that you have us step up. To those who much is given, much is required. Thank you for this food this day and all you've given us. In your name we pray. Amen.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Claude Figueroa, and I have the pleasure of being the chairman of the Energy Committee for the Tyler Area Chamber of Commerce. And it's my pleasure to be here before you to just kind of get things going and move things along. And before we continue on with the program, one thing that I would love to do is to thank our sponsors. There's a table tent on your table showing who our sponsors are, and of course they've been rotating on the monitors behind me and before me, showing who they are. Specifically, would like to recognize our presenting sponsor is Lockton Companies, and our platinum sponsors are Delic Refining, Mewbourne Oil, and the Genico Group. Also, our gold sponsors include Clemens Fluids, Golub Morgan Petty, Henry and Peters, Texas Oil and Gas Association, Jasper Ventures, and Ridge Wireline. If you would please join me in a round of applause for these wonderful folks. Without the support of these sponsors and friends, we would not be able to put on this wonderful educational presentation for you today, which incidentally, it is the 11th annual summit, and we are still going strong. And nothing more inspiring to me, who work in the natural gas industry, to hear that testimony from Commissioner Christian about what Winston Churchill said about East Texas and that sea of oil. And folks, this is a rich and strong area we live in, and I'm so excited to be here and representing the energy community here in the Tyler-Smith County area. Now, as we move along, I'd love to recognize also our elected officials who joined us today. We have with us from the 12th Court of Appeals, Chief Justice James Worthen, right over there. Also, Texas Senator Brian Hughes. Brian, where are you? And from Texas State Representative Cole Hefner, his office, we have Sharon Guthrie. Visiting with us today from our City of Tyler government, we have Don Warren, our mayor. From the City Council, we have Councilman Bob Westbrook, Councilman James Wynn, Councilman Brad Curtis, Council Lady Shirley McKellar, and Councilman Stuart Haney. Also visiting from the City of Bullard, we are honored with the presence of Mayor Pram Frederick. And accompanying the mayor is Councilman Lane McDaniel. And it's my pleasure to introduce also a man that needs no introduction, Smith County Judge Nathaniel Moran. And County Commissioners Neil Franklin and County Commissioner Terry Phillips. And representing Tyler Junior College Board of Trustees, we have Mr. Lonnie Uzel. And from Tyler Independent School District, we have Trustee Board Chairman Wade Washman. Thank you to our elected officials for your service, and thank you for your dedication to continue to make East Texas a better place. I'd like to recognize also the participation from Brent Jasper and Ernie LaFleur, who are with the Energy Subcommittee. They organized students from our local schools, area schools, that are engineering students, to help with the summit setup and so forth. And these young people have worked very hard. I'm not talking about Ernie and Brent, but the students that they organized. And Brent Jasper and Ernie LaFleur worked with the UT Tyler College of Engineering and the SFA Geology Department. So if the students would please rise and be recognized. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Ernie and Brent. At this time, I would like to welcome Ben Morgan, who is going to introduce our first speaker.
Well, if 2020 wasn't odd enough with COVID, and 2021 with Winter Storm Uri, 2022 is led off with Elon Musk becoming a resident of Texas, and Tesla becoming a Texas-based company. And to get a little stranger, Elon tweeted out the other day, after Nancy Pelosi and some of his other favorite politicians, Elizabeth Warren, had been tweeting out, he tweeted out the other day, "Hate to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas production immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures." Well, my name is Ben Morgan, and I'm with the Lockton Companies. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce a fellow East Texas from Palestine, Texas, Todd Staples. Todd was named president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association in November of 2014. Founded in 1919, Texas Oil and Gas Association is the oldest and the largest oil and gas trade association in Texas, representing every facet of the industry. Staples leads a dynamic team whose mission is to support Texas Oil and Gas' vast and diverse membership, which represents over 80% of Texas. Crude oil and natural gas production operates over 80% of the state's refining capacity and is responsible for the vast majority of the state's pipeline network that reliably delivers resources to consumers throughout Texas and across our nation and around the world. The oil and natural gas industry provides Texans with hundreds of thousands of jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars in direct expenditures, taxes, and royalties that solidify this industry as the cornerstone of the Texas economy, while also working to protect and improve our environment. Working with the Texoga Board, Staples developed and implemented a multifaceted approach to educate voters and elected officials on the industry's contributions to ensure energy policy and decisions are based on economic and scientific facts. Staples has worked to develop coalitions and implement strategies that have resulted in passing landmark legislation to preserve infrastructure development while improving the rights of private property owners, clarify the state regulation of oil and gas, and advance science-based policies and regulations that benefit both our economy and our environment. Prior to Texoga, Staples has served as the Texas Oil and Gas Texas Agricultural Commissioner, winning 2 statewide elections, and also served with distinction in the Texas Senate and the Texas House of Representatives. Please help me welcome Texas Oil and Gas President Todd Staples.
Thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate that, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be with you today. It's always good to be in Northeast Texas. I appreciate the work that each of you do to make Texas a better place. Anybody here today just a little bit proud to be a Texan? Anybody? Hey, you should be. We have much to be proud of, a great deal to be thankful for, and your work and your efforts has contributed mightily to the growth of this great state. And I thank you all very much. The local elected officials that are here from throughout Northeast Texas, we know that you work hard on behalf of your citizens. Judge Moran, it's good to be in your county and look for your next step, and the work that you're doing and leadership you're providing for East Texas means a lot, and we appreciate that. Chairman Christian, you are one of the hardest working statewide officials that there is, next to Chief Justice Worthen. I tell you, Justice Worthen is everywhere. I see him. But I want you to know Chairman Christian has stepped up for this industry. Difficult days, and Ben mentioned a few of them, the difficulties in 2020 and then in 2021 and then what we're facing here in 2022. Y'all probably remember the name of a guy, J.C. Watts, right? You remember that name? He's spoken here in Tyler, UT Tyler before, played a little football at OU. He served in the United States Congress. Someone asked him how he liked serving in Congress, and he said, you know, if he didn't have but 2 years left to live, he'd like to spend his last 2 years as a member of the United States Congress, because these last two have been some of the longest years of his life. In the oil and gas business, you can certainly feel that way, because it has been one challenge after another, but good things are happening. I mean, you know, a year ago, people were questioning the future of oil and gas. Today, people are questioning if they have a future without oil and gas. That's the reality of it. A decade ago, European countries traded energy security for energy ideology. And today, they're suffering mightily for the choices that they've made. I don't want that for the United States of America. And I believe that Texas can certainly lead the way. And I want to have a conversation with you today just how Texas can do that, the work that is done in this state, and to talk about what our future is. We hear 2050 a lot, and 2050 is meaningful, and let's talk about how we're going to get there and how we're going to fuel modern life as we do it. I'm very proud to work with the men and women in the Texas Oil and Gas Association. They are a great group of folks. My former chairman is here today, Ro Buckley. Appreciate the work that Ro does as current chairman of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. And Texoga represents some of the smallest operators in Texas to some of the biggest in the world. And it's amazing the role that they're playing is providing the energy that fuels modern life, the energy that is the cornerstone for 96% of the products that we use each and every day. I'm very excited to work with them in the work that they're doing. You can see it's oil production, natural gas production, it's midstream pipelines, it's refining. Ports are members of Texoga, our growing LNG industry that is supplying liquefied natural gas throughout the world, and it's having a big influence on meeting the world's energy needs today. If you think about just how big the United States is, it's pretty phenomenal, as the data on the screen behind me shows you. Now, these are 2020 numbers, but it shows that the U.S. is the largest oil-producing country in the world, right? And you can see that we're significantly above Russia and Saudi Arabia, number 2 and 3. There are about 100 countries in the world that produce oil. The U.S. today is up to about 11.6. We dropped off at the low point when the pandemic hit to about 11 million barrels a day. Prior to the pandemic and COVID, we were at 13 million barrels a day. So if you think we can produce more, we can. And we can do that right here in America. The U.S. still ranks number 1, even with all the controversy that's been occurring. We're about 11.6. Russia is about 10.5, was the latest daily numbers that we had in November of 2021. And then the Saudi was a little over 10.2 at the beginning of this year. Texas is a big player in what goes on. We produce 43% of our nation's crude oil. Now, you all know that Texas is number 1, and they say, you know, it ain't bragging if it's true, but it is amazing. It is amazing when you think about we produce 4 times more than the next closest state. That is just, Ken, that is just amazing, the work that is being done to make that occur. North Dakota is the next closest. It's just a little over 10. There are 32 states in America that have some form of production. Now, we all kind of like to think about if Texas were its own country from time to time. That resonates pretty well with Texans, doesn't it? If we were our own country, Texas would be the 4th largest producing country in the world when it comes to oil. And look where we rank. I mean, we're right behind Saudi Arabia. We're bigger than Iraq and Canada and the other 96 countries in the world. that are producing oil as where Texas would be if we were our own country. That is phenomenal when you think about that. The United States is supplying about 15% of our world's crude oil today. Our world uses about 100 million barrels a day of crude oil. And Russia is certainly on our minds, and what is taking place there, they produce about and ship and export about 7% of the world's production. So it's very significant, particularly when you consider that Russian exports went to about 60% to Europe and 20% to China. We talked a little bit about LNG and the role that it's playing. The United States became Europe's largest source of LNG. In 2021, we accounted for about 26% of their supply. In January of 2022, the United States supplied more than half of all LNG imports to Europe for that month. Understanding this framework is very important when we look about where we're going to go, how our allies are going to get the fuel that they need supplied to them. If Texas were its own country, we would be the third largest natural gas producing country in the world, right behind the United States and Russia. So Texas certainly has an outsized role to play when it comes to thinking about our world's energy needs and how they're going to be supplied. To tell a little bit about what happens with the Texas natural gas production, because we know that's how people heat and cool their homes today all over the world. Natural gas supplies a little over 40% of the Texas electric grid today. The power that fuels the ERCOT system, about 40% of that is from Texas natural gas. On a daily basis, Texas produced almost 26 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas. And it's kind of like ice cream. Eat all you can and sell the rest, right? And that's what we do with natural gas. We consume about 10, 11, 12 billion cubic feet a day. And I hope you can see on the screen there, we're supplying over 5 billion cubic feet a day to Mexico. These numbers were ended in November of 2021, and that shows that we were shipping about 4 billion cubic feet of liquefied natural gas around the world. That number is growing significantly, and there are many opportunities. We're also neighbors to people here in our own country by supplying almost 6 billion cubic feet a day there. So what happens in Texas literally does change the world, has a really big influence. And when we don't realize that the policy decisions we make have an influence, we get into trouble. The slide that you see on the screen now, I borrowed from a letter that Toby Rice, who is the president and CEO of EQT Corporation, sent to U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. This is dated February 16th, 2022. Rice sent this letter in response to 10 United States senators that wrote a letter to the administration asking them to limit U.S. natural gas exports and examine their impact on domestic energy prices. I think what our policy makers need to do is look at what these policies are doing right here in our own country, as this graph shows. So in thinking about this graph, 10 of the signers of this letter were senators from New England. In the week preceding when this letter was sent, natural gas pricing in New England reached levels that rivaled those the highest in the world, approaching $30 an MCF. Just look at the screen. That's 6 times what the price of natural gas is in other parts of the country that they were facing in New England. So why are these prices in New England over 6 times the prices of those in neighboring states? Maybe it's because New York State had a ban on fracking. Maybe it's because of all the canceled pipelines that you see on the screen there in red. Those are pipelines that were planned to be built to move that product, to make it available to those citizens. Maybe it's because they're not producing the resources right there in their own backyard. Policies really do matter. Signaling what is important matters to move production and to move assets to where they can be most productive. And right now in our country, we've been hearing the wrong signaling. Now, Texas has fared pretty well in this process, as we've discussed, us being the number one. Texas has been a leader because of 3 basic things. One is we have a big population. One is we have some really good resources, but the third one is the policies that we have that are pro-energy, pro-business, that encourages investment and that encourages expansion, and our citizens have been the ones to benefit from that. President Biden did send a strong signal the other day when he banned Russian oil to the United States. It was one step in a two-step process. Everybody in this room understands the two-step, don't we? We understand the importance that you just don't take one step. In Texas, you have to take two. And the second step that this administration needs to take is to unleash American energy leadership. If we unleash American energy leadership, we can have a positive influence not only on the United States and what consumers are facing, but we can have a positive influence and be the partners that our allies around the globe need. Messaging matters, and we know that 2020 we heard a certain type of messaging, and hopefully this will work and we'll be reminded of the type of messaging that we heard in 2020.
So I just want to give him a chance to respond, and then we can come back.
Let's stay on.
We're staying on this issue.
Number one, no more subsidies for fossil fuel industry, no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends. Number one.
Is that ambiguous? Was that? Messaging matters. That was in 2020. That was the message that our country heard. In 2021, this is what we've heard. Projects canceled, revoked, stopped, delayed, barriers, discouraged. Now, what if you told your football team all those same things? You think they're going to go out and perform? Oil and gas needs to be treated like an asset, not like a liability. It is a national treasure that we have. And when you hear words like these, we know that there is a disincentive to move forward because uncertainty is the enemy of growth. And when you have that uncertainty, it changes the decision making that people make. Not only did we hear the conversation in the 2020 presidential campaign, not only have we seen the cancellation of projects, the institution of delays of permits, but we've seen the president nominate two different people, one for the office of comptroller of currency and the other for vice chair of supervision at the Federal Reserve, whose stated policy is to starve oil and natural gas from the capital that they need and to have them to go bankrupt. And we're surprised that these poor policy decisions have now been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, and it's coming home to roost. We even have congressmen today calling for a windfall profits tax. I guess they missed the economics class that I took when about the economist that said anything you tax, you have less of. You tax jobs, you have less jobs. You tax energy, you have less energy. And so there's certainly a balancing role to be played, but the signaling that we do not want oil and natural gas produced in America has had a profound impact. Asking other countries to produce oil and natural gas rather than asking our own men and women in this country to produce oil and gas is the wrong signal. It makes me wonder, do they think that we're not going to need energy of the future? On the screen, you'll see that we have developed countries and developing countries and the projections out through 2050, looking at the energy consumption that's going to grow and that has been projected to grow. On the screen, you'll see the gross domestic product and the purchasing power that's expected to grow out through 2050. We see how our population is going to grow. And then the one on the far right, you'll see that oil and gas is going to continue to grow. By every learned person's projections, it's going to play the dominant role in meeting and fueling the world's energy needs, but so are other energy sources as well, and we welcome them all. We just don't need government picking winners and losers. We need to let the marketplace accomplish and make those decisions about where our energy needs and how they will be filled. Look, if we've got 7.5 billion people on the planet today and the projection is going to be 10 billion people by the year 2050, do you think we're going to be needing more energy or less during that time period? We're going to need more oil and gas. We're going to be needing more batteries. We're going to need more renewables. We're going to need more hydrogen. We're going to need to unleash the American entrepreneurial spirit, the innovation and pioneering technologies that has built the best and strongest country in the world. That's how we will meet our energy needs, and that's how we will meet our growth needs. And we can do this being sensitive to our environment and making certain that we are being the environmental stewards that we need to be, because America has environmental leadership. Oil and gas produced in this country is produced the most sensitive to the needs of our environment of any country in the world. You can see on the screen there, this is data from the U.S. EPA that was just printed in the Houston Chronicle a couple of days ago that showed how carbon dioxide emissions have decreased 8% from 2010 to 2019. Guess what happened in China and Russia during that period? They increased 25% and 21% their CO2 emissions. So if you care about the climate, if you want to make climate progress, you want oil and natural gas produced in America, because we do it better than any other country in the world. And the oil that's produced in the Permian Basin has some of the lowest carbon intensity of any oil that's produced in the world. This is not information that's hard to get, folks. This is information that our administration, that our nation should be wrapping our arms around right now. And it's not just a one-shot wonder. America has continued energy leadership. We have continued environmental leadership. Carbon dioxide emissions have been declining for 30 years in America. Methane emissions are at their lowest levels. It is phenomenal to think about that Americans are breathing the cleanest air in decades because of American energy leadership is tied to American environmental leadership. Our Railroad Commission is doing a fantastic job. Commissioner Christian and the commission announced just a couple of months ago that the flaring rate in Texas is now less than 0.2%. That's pretty low, Mr. Chairman. I don't know how you do much better than that. And that's because the energy companies came together. They worked with our state's leadership. Our energy companies formed the Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition, focused on reducing emissions and reducing routine flaring. In fact, they adopted a goal of ending routine flaring by the year of 2030, and many companies are already exceeding that date and getting there ahead of time because American entrepreneurship is undeniable. We have smarter, better, right here in our country. The terms that you're seeing on the screen today are terms that every energy company in America are talking about on having a lower emissions profile, a lower emissions future, how to capture carbon, and using innovation and technology to make that happen. State-of-the-art operations are occurring. They're using leak detection and repair equipment. They're using optical gas imaging. We know that technology is there today, satellite imagery, flying over with planes. We want and embrace that technology because we want to produce our products in a cleaner, stronger, better way for America. Because energy security and national security are inextricably linked, and we know that we can meet the objectives that our world has set forward. A lot of people hear the word energy transition and they think that it'll be a future without oil and gas. I think the circumstances that our world in has dispelled that. But what we really need is an energy addition, because we need more energy to meet the world's growing appetite for energy that fuels every aspect of our lives. It's simply undeniable. And if you think about it, every Texan benefits from a robust oil and gas sector, whether you live in the middle of the oil patch or not. And that's because just last year, this industry paid $15.8 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. Even Aggies like me know that equates to $43 million a day when you do the math. $43 million a day, paying for our schools, paying for our roads, paying for our universities. It is amazing. 422,000 people last year had a direct job in oil and gas. And that doesn't include the multiplier that expands out beyond our economy. Since we've been calculating those numbers in 2007, this industry has paid almost $179 billion to to help fund these programs and to improve our life. I can't imagine what our legislators are going to have this next session, because as I said, you don't have to live in the middle of the oil patch to benefit. This oil severance taxes, the gas severance taxes, the property taxes from mineral property owners is going to be phenomenal in funding state and local governments and what goes on in this state. And that doesn't include the payroll for the hundreds of thousands of people that have a job. I'd like to see that continue. How about you? Messaging really does matter. Americans have a history of energy leadership. We need to reset American energy policy. We need a strategic energy plan for America, not a game of whack-a-mole. And that's what our energy policy, unfortunately, has been. We can do that, and we can send the right message. And the president did ban Russian oil and gas into America, but now he needs to send that strong second message. All the things that he talked about canceling and revoking and delaying, he needs to authorize them. He needs to restate them. He needs to move forward with them. He needs to advance them. He needs to expedite them. And he needs to encourage American energy leadership. We need to hear that from this administration. We need to hear it for our consumers at home that are suffering at the pump. And we need to hear it for our allies around the globe that are having to make some very difficult decisions about where they get their energy to fuel their lives. Texas is poised to lead, ladies and gentlemen. Texans can move forward. We know that because of innovation and ingenuity and pioneering breakthrough technologies that we live the best life that we ever have lived. We're living longer than we ever have. We're living more affluently than we ever have. We're living more prosperously than we ever have. And this is the type of future that we can have. But it will be determined on the role that you play. And so I think it's time that we stand up and tell our nation and our friends and everyone in Texas, let's reset American energy policy and let's reclaim American energy security. Thanks for letting me be here with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd, and thanks for being an advocate for most of us in this room in our day-to-day jobs and providing for our families and our nation, and so thanks for what you do. My name is Brent Jasper. I'm with Jasper Ventures. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. We have Mike Nasi coming to us from Austin, Texas. Mike is a partner with Jackson Walker, and he's been an environmental and energy lawyer there for 3 decades. Mike is counsel for energy interest and electric cooperatives and national litigation and policy initiatives, including matters pending before the Federal Circuit Courts of Appeals and the Supreme Court of the United States. Mr. Nasi has been honored with a long list of accolades and awards that he asked me not to read to you here today. But perhaps the most impactful thing that Mr. Nasi has done for everyday Americans is the creation of the Life Powered Project. Those of you who attended last year may remember that, which is a national research and education effort dedicated to raising the American energy IQ, and where Mike continues to serve as senior advisor. We're going to watch a short video from Life Powered, and then please help me give a warm welcome to Mr. Mike Nasi.
All right, let's give that video a hand, please. Now, I imagine it's quite a strange thing to hear a lawyer talking about videos, but I bet the Chief Justice will empathize with this comment. Immediately after the first time I appeared here, actually with Todd, we figured it was 2015. Great honor to be there. Right after that, we had an oral argument in the D.C. Circuit on a very important case that I actually talked about that year. And in that oral argument, one of the smartest jurists in America, I won't mention who appointed him, you'll probably figure it out, literally asked a question, well, couldn't we just turn off that coal plant and put a solar panel on top? And it was a wake-up call to me, as a guy who's been a lawyer thinking that the law would actually make justice happen in the world. And I realized the American energy IQ was so low that even the smartest people in America were as dumb as you could ever imagine when it comes to energy. So Brooke Rollins, who was the TPPF head at the time, and I and some others, born mainly out of Midland, but some certainly from East Texas, just they shamed me into doing something about it. I made the best two hires I've ever made, Brent Bennett and Jason Isaac, who you heard from last year, and then I went back to practicing law, which is where I should be anyway, right? But that effort was all born by that kind of wake-up call. So I'm here, I mean, it's just fantastic to follow Todd. He does an amazing job for the oil and gas industry. It's gonna be awesome to hear Scott Tinker come after. So I'm actually gonna step right in the middle of those two great experts and talk to you about electricity policy, but you can obviously tell what Life Power does is to actually rally everybody, to give them some basic communication and educational materials so that we can raise that American energy IQ. I've got 3 kids, 2 in college, 1 about to be, and I'm very worried about the future of our country. And those are very smart. My wife's an engineer. I've got energy executives in my family. They have been filled with information, and they come back from college just saying, Dad, it's ugly. Right? It is ugly. Your videos need to be watched by everybody. So lifepower.org is easily the most important work I do. I'm going to talk about some of that work as part of these remarks, but I'm also going to try to scare you a little bit because just what Todd said, as bad as the energy policy making has been in the last 12 months to 18 months on oil and gas, it's just as bad, maybe even worse on electricity. And that relates to all of us and oil and gas. So what I'll do is not turn off my PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to hit a recap of a pesky little storm we had last February. Now, Brent Bennett did a great job last year right after the event, probably telling you about it. I'll touch on that in case any of y'all missed that. Won't repeat what he said, but instead focus on what the state of Texas and other states are doing and whether or not they're learning from that cautionary tale that we got told. Okay, then we're going to talk about, how that's playing out in the country, and then frankly, we're going to finish with both an exciting and optimistic view like Todd had, and some scary things that are still happening domestically. And again, the goal, and I think this event is fantastic, to try to give you all the tools. You all understand this stuff. You get this stuff. What you need is tools to be able to communicate with the people that you are praying with, are going to school with, or at sporting events with, interacting with on social media, because all the smartest statements in the world don't do you any good if we don't give you the ability to actually communicate at multiple levels with people that will trust your opinion, because it is a ripple effect education, and that's the only way that we're going to make it all happen. So let's talk about last February. The first thing I tell people, and I've been asked to testify about this storm and speak about it at policy events all over the country, I always take people back to these very few minutes in the evening of February 15th, the early morning hours. This was an ERCOT storm. It was not an SPP storm. So as we stand right now, it was really the rest of Texas. But trust me, you all would have felt this storm in even deeper ways if it had not been that we saved the grid, frankly, 4 minutes, just with about 4 minutes to spare. And what we mean by that, and I'm not going to go dive deep on electrical engineering with you today, but the system has safety valves designed to protect human life. And if we keep and large machines, if we keep the frequency of our system drains to an unstable level for long enough, the entire system truly blacks out. So, you can call it a blackout if you like, but it's actually truly not a blackout unless the system actually has frequency-related trips and drains its system of all of its voltage. It's like a plumbing system. It's like losing water pressure. If that voltage is lost, it takes, and there was testimony by experts in the hundreds of hours of hearings that the legislature had, it would have taken at least 4 to 6 weeks to restart that system. So instead of having 4 million Texans who had to do without power for 2 to 3 to 4 days in the ERCOT region, my family included, and without water for another week, we would have had 26 million Texans without power for 6 weeks. And I cannot emphasize enough, that's embarrassing. We were 4 minutes away from that happening. It should have been front page news for a full year. Okay, what I can tell you is Life Powered and other very important groups are trying to keep our legislators reminded this is not a story of the past. This is where we're heading again with the electric grid. So what actually happened during the storm? This is a very detailed graph. I'm not going to dive deep, but I will tell you this data, which comes directly from the Energy Information Agency, which shows you the kinds of energy that were in our market, in the ERCOT market, before, during, and after the storm. And the most dramatic thing to point out is that at the very peak, at the top of that graph, is when our demand was the highest in the coldest part of that storm, and we had a massive drop-off of our electricity grid. And boy, I like to quote an old Sunday school teacher when it comes to how everybody was pointing their fingers at each other about this storm. She used to say, guilty dogs bark. You guys have probably heard that before. And I mean, you would have, like the renewable energy industry came out, gas failed the system, okay? A bunch of other people said, that the gas supply system failed the system. That's not what happened. This system is a high-performing electric interconnection with natural gas. We have a great diversity of fuels, but what we have built into our system is a significant, now at the time of the storm, a full third of our power coming from weather-dependent wind and solar. And those resources can be a part, and frankly probably should be a part of our grid. But what we realize, the painful lesson is you get that much penetration of that much weather dependence, it puts strains on the system that we are not prepared to deal with. And when all of that wind and solar disappeared, when it was, newsflash, cold and dark, and still, the system responded. Obviously, natural gas filled this huge role. Coal and nuclear played a huge role, but we had disruptions in that supply chain. We're working on those issues, but the stress of both the way we compensate power generators and producers of energy and the way we subsidize that intermittent energy is the big story that is not getting enough attention, and we're trying to spend a lot more time making sure the policy reforms fit that. And this is way in the weeds, but you see that dip on the far left and the far right? When wind and solar actually reappeared in our grid, during those hours, the people that were producing electricity with gas and coal and nuclear, who, by the way, were scrambling all over the, amazing men and women doing amazing things to get those power plants back online. On Friday, they were scrambling, risking their lives to get the power plants back online. On Saturday, their power plants were paying the grid to take their energy. The price of electricity in the ERCOT market went negative because of the influence of the production tax credit and investment tax credit of wind and solar. So again, those resources are going to be a part, they're going to be a growing part of our grid, but the way we subsidize them is literally destroying the underpinning reliability of our grid. So let's talk about the rest of the country. ERCOT's on the left, that's about 85% of the Texas market. MISO's in the middle, that's a little bit in southeast Texas, and the rest is kind of what you might call the eastern Midwest. And then SPP, the Southwest Power Pool, which is where we are right now in terms of market interconnection, and up through the middle of the country. These are the statistics of what each resource did during Winter Storm Uri. And you see the gray bar is how much installed capacity we had of that fuel, and the blue bar is what they did during the storm. And it's obvious that we have a real problem brewing across the system where we have weather-dependent renewables vastly underperforming and fuel-resilient fuels vastly overperforming. Now, gas in the Texas market still overperformed its capacity because we do so well in ramping up our natural gas capability. There were difficulties in other regions, but those were actually driven more by price than by actual supply disruption. But what's dramatic about this is not the grid. This grid is already unstable because of these dynamics. The grid that the current president and the EPA and FERC envision has us 100% dependent, or at least 60 to 70% dependent on these fuels that literally no-showed during a storm like that. And you can love wind and solar all day long, and batteries. You will never be able, with the current set of technologies, to run a grid like that in a safe way. So did the Texas legislature learn this? Well, I'm happy to report that in overwhelming bipartisan majorities, the Texas legislature passed a whole series of measures to better value what's called dispatchable electricity, thermal generation based on gas, coal, and nuclear power. That's not a desire to subsidize those services, it's a desire to value dispatchability and reliability. And a few things that Dr. Bennett did during the immediate aftermath of the storm that were so valuable, and his testimony in the legislature proved to be very persuasive, really frankly to both sides of the aisle, was that there was this kind of mythology, kind of the guilty dog's bark problem, that, oh, you know, if everybody would have weatherized, we would have been fine. If we would have been able to weatherize wind turbines, they would have been spinning. And very simple way of saying it, weatherization doesn't make the wind blow. Okay, let that settle in. Okay, again, doesn't make wind a bad resource. It certainly doesn't make wind a source you can rely upon in cold, still weather. And what we modeled at Life Powered, and Brent did a good job of explaining, is even if we would have had every thermal resource online, we would have had no natural gas supply disruption, we would have had weatherization, we still would have had 24 hours of outage because we have allowed our thermal generation fleet to be degraded and displaced with weather-dependent energy. And that is just an extraordinary thing because that tells you that we could throw $1 billion at weatherization, we could try to regulate the heck out of natural gas, which we should not do, and we would still have exposure. And by the way, this situation is getting worse, not better. I know this is the bad news part of the story. Something very important to y'all locally. Coal, clearly throughout the other markets, MISO and SPP, saved the day. I mean, the Oklahoma governor said it explicitly. Because it is a fuel resilient, it's a weather resilient fuel, and you can store it on site. That doesn't mean gas isn't weather resilient. It is and can be even more. But in Texas, we lost 5,000 megawatts of coal in 5 years and another 1,200 megawatts of gas. We retired prematurely a whole host of reliable energy sources because of the erosive economics of renewable energy credits, okay? And a lot of people said, it doesn't matter. We can do without them. Well, you put those power plants back in our grid, we might have had a couple of hours of outages. You probably wouldn't even have heard about this storm in Tyler, Texas. You might not have heard about natural gas prices going up because we would have been able to handle it. We can't lose that kind of power. So when you hear local discussions about we can do without power plants that burn coal, unless they're coming with a natural gas plant right behind it, you should be asking really hard questions because that's not what's happening. They're not replacing coal with natural gas. They're jumping right over natural gas and trying to build as much wind and solar as they can while the subsidies are sad. And we're missing an extraordinary opportunity for natural gas in that regard. This is the Texas ERCOT market. 26 million Texans are served by it. And over 10 years, did we vastly expand our natural gas generation capacity while we sit on a sea of natural gas? During a growing economy and growing energy demand, we shrunk it. We obviously shrunk our coal fleet. We lost a little bit of nuke capacity, and yet we more than doubled our wind, and we're about to triple and even quadruple our solar. Where we will be in the next few years is pretty scary, and I'll talk about that toward the end of the talk. This is definitely not going to be something I do deep dive with you. This is, if anybody says, the legislature didn't do anything in response to Winter Storm Uri, this is a little demonstrative exhibit, to use a lawyer's term. These are the bills that passed and were signed into law by our governor in direct response. This is easily the most comprehensive set of energy reforms ever put together by a state legislature. I couldn't be more proud of our leadership. All of us came together. A lot of difficult negotiations had to occur, and we did a lot of work in a lot of different parts of this story. To talk about one aspect of that is really important. The governor did us a great service. We could have had to talk about that other slide for an hour. The governor put it on one page. He said, we have to better value dispatchability. We've got to start valuing electrons that are there when we need them the most, and we need to do it now. That's basically what the legislature said. The governor just said it in a shorter version. And a really important thing that we're currently, literally minute by minute in the next few days, negotiating to make sure happens, is we need to make sure that we allocate the costs. What happens in a system that becomes unreliable is we start building in more security blankets. We try to have more dispatchable capacity available. Historically, the way that utility overseeing markets like ERCOT, like SPP as it relates to you all, they just put that cost on the customers. But the customers aren't causing those problems. Those problems are becoming more pervasive because the roles of subsidies are making our grid more weather dependent. So we've got to have some kind of cost allocation in our system that doesn't punish wind and solar, but actually levels out the erosive impact of those subsidies in an equitable and non-discriminatory way. Texas has an opportunity, like so many things we've done in the history of our energy policy, to do something here that the whole world is watching. Everybody in the world is striving to have more wind and solar. And nobody knows how they're going to make the grid work and have it be a causation-based system. If you don't figure out a way to shift that reliability cost on the people who are causing the problem, you will get both an unreliable grid, and then there will be some frantic efforts to try to build new power plants, and you will pay for them, not the people who caused the problem. So this is really one of those critically important times. And another extraordinary policy response that I'm very proud that we were at the center of, pointing out, and Todd did a great job of identifying this in part of his remarks in terms of the problem. One of the reasons we did not build natural gas facilities in the state of Texas the way we should have is because banks are depriving capital from fossil fuel development and power plant construction. I see it every day. I'm around board tables largely for rural electric cooperatives who are trying to keep the electric grid reliable, and they're being told, sorry, you use natural gas and coal, we're not going to insure you. We're not going to give you bonds. We're not going to give you money for a new power plant. It's happening. It's the most brilliant, I say that with an asterisk next to it because I'm not happy about it, the most brilliant advocacy strategy by the environmental left in the last half century is to work with virtue signaling international financial institutions to systematically deprive energy explorers and developers of the capital they need to do what they want to do. So some great leaders in the energy industry, Bud Brigham, Cody Campbell, others came together, Chris Wright, and they basically identified, we don't want to put government in telling banks what to do. We want to make sure the states that are energy producers make very careful decisions about who they do business with to make sure that public pension dollars are retired firemen, are retired policemen, are retired teachers. Their pensions are not appropriated for political gain. And the only way you do that is you pass a law that says the state will scrutinize the activities of the people that we invest in, and if those companies are explicitly coercing dollars away from fossil fuel, they don't have to invest in fossil fuel. It's a free market. They don't have to do that. But if they're using their market power, their proxies, et cetera, to deprive oil, gas, coal, whatever, energy production, then we are, as a state of Texas, not going to do business with them. We're not going to let our public pensions be sacrificed by them. Let me be clear, these laws make it absolutely clear. If there's a fund out there that would bring our retired firemen more money, that's going to be the fund that gets picked. But what they can't do is use ESG virtue signaling scoring to try to make that fund look more valuable or higher performing. And the comptroller of Texas just issued the first shot across the bow. He was instructed by the legislature and the governor's signature to develop a list of companies. This is just a sampling of what will be a longer list of companies that have been guilty of this boycotting activity. And I can tell you as a lawyer, I am proud of how narrow and how carefully drawn this statute is. It does not trip constitutional wires. It does not put government where it shouldn't be. It just lets the state of Texas stand up for its citizens and its energy industry. And I guarantee you, I speak in North Dakota, Wyoming, Kentucky, West Virginia, Minnesota, Utah, Wyoming. They are all super pumped about the state of Texas's bill, and they're passing their own, even Oklahoma. So this is an exciting time, and it's great leadership. And so that's a really great step forward, and I think you're going to see real benefits. I mean, there are some really big, and I'm not going to mention any names, brand names, money-centered banks and investment companies that have, frankly, had a real bad run of bad press releases over the last few years hating on fossil fuels. They're all putting out press releases now how much they love oil and gas. We welcome that. And we're glad that their conduct will be scrutinized by our leaders and make sure, again, they can choose not to invest. But if they use their market power to deprive capital, and they tell a co-op in South Texas, you can't have an insurance product because our investors are not okay with you using gas, that's gotta end. And if it doesn't happen in the states that produce energy, it won't happen anywhere. All right. As everybody learned from the storm, are other states following our needs, and where are we going next? Let me be clear, it's a pretty scary 24 to 36 months ahead of us. Because just as scary as our geopolitical situation is with oil, our domestic grid situation is even more scary to everyday Americans in our lives. We are gonna add all the way up to 33,000 megawatts of solar. We're gonna have 4 times, what did I say? It's twice. It's twice what California has in solar we will have by the end of 2025. That's gonna be a great resource when the sun's shining, okay? I don't have nearly as much to say about how bad this is other than that very risky period as the sun is setting and before the sun rises. Okay, like I said before, these resources can and probably should, especially solar, be integrated into our system. But when they are displacing our thermal dispatchable and preventing us from building natural gas plants, it is a recipe for disaster. Here's how much wind we have and will have. So, bottom line, by the end of 2023, between 47 and 51% of the installed capacity of the Texas ERCOT grid will be weather dependent. MISO did a study right before Winter Storm Uri, and they concluded after a big engineering study, you know what? 32 to 33% is about where system reliability really starts to fall apart because of the impact of weather dependence on our grid. That was a fancy word, prescient study. Because right after that, guess where Texas was when Winter Storm Uri hit? 33%. And what happened? And we're gonna be 50% in 2 years. And that's coming to you in SPP. Here's the future of SPP on the left. If you're wondering, if you're looking for gas plants in that pie graph, it's probably too small for you to see. The future of SPP, of their grid, is dominated by the construction of wind and solar. So ERCOT is a cautionary tale. It's on the cutting edge, and everyone's gonna need to learn from it. And again, this is not a bash fest on renewable energy. It's a wake-up call. And I've actually told my friends that do that kind of work and they advocate for that kind of work, if you guys don't get it right here, you're gonna have a black eye, and we're not gonna kill 200 to 700 people, we'll kill thousands of people. Can you imagine how many people would have perished if 26 million people had no power for 6 weeks? It would have been literally the biggest disaster in the history of our country. I mean, that's not a hyperbole. I mean, there's books out there, you guys have probably read them. What happens to our society when we don't have any electricity? So, we need to get real serious about it. Now, Scott Tinker, who, like Elvis, is in the building, he's gonna do a great job, I know, because I've known him for a long time, talking about geopolitics. But let me tie a couple of things back to the situation we're currently in as it relates to electricity policy and geopolitics. Kind of you wonder, how could that be? Because electricity policy is by and large an internal grid situation, right? So, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have to think thematically, it's too good. Plus this movie is just so fantastic, right? First off, one of the most important things Life Powered tries to do is that we're happy warriors. We want to celebrate the success of every energy resource, okay? And the US energy story is one of extraordinary environmental accomplishment. Todd talked about it already, and we spend a lot of our time focusing, because when you do, and again, I'm a lawyer, not a pollster, but when you work with some of the best public opinion reviewers in America, when Americans are educated about how much environmental progress we have accomplished, it fundamentally changes their perspective of fossil energy in particular. What we have accomplished in America is an amazing thing. We have reduced every pollutant we know hurts you by dramatic proportions while we grew our population, our miles driven, and our economy at unprecedented levels. This is the gold standard of what the world can emulate. And as an environmental attorney, I speak to classes, I teach a class at the law school and at a grad school. I tell people, you all should be proud. This is a direct result of the United States using capitalism and sound Republican governance, okay, democratic governance, to regulate with technology and not ideology, to steal and pivot off a phrase Todd said. Oh, this one blows people away. So we hear all the time about how Europe's clean and how we should follow the path of European energy companies because they do it better than us. Particulate matter is is the pollutant that kills more people in the world than any other by a large margin. Because it kills people both outside because of pollution and inside because they don't have energy and they burn wood and dung to cook their food. And I know Scott's gonna talk about that. He knows more about that and is pinky than everybody else in this room. But this is an environmental lawyer's graph. The particulate matter standard that the United States has is by far the most stringent in the world, and we exceed our own standard. We meet our own standard. We beat it, and compared to our competitors, even in Europe, we are a gold standard company. Who hears this in the news? And why is this important? Because there are literally billions of people in the world that don't have energy, that live 20-year shorter lives, whose kids die at a rate of 4 to 5 times as much, whose women do not have liberty and opportunity, who are looking to know how to make energy affordable and to clean their environment. And we have the example right here. It's an amazing thing, and frankly, I really do. I'm an eternally optimistic person. I'm convinced that enough Americans are gonna figure this out, and it's gonna change the future of our energy policy in America. And if it takes a geopolitical wake-up call to do it, so be it. So another video series, again, kind of funny for a lawyer to think about videos, but when in the prior administration I got called to DC and asked by the Department of Energy, what is the single biggest missing element on energy education in America? I hadn't really thought about that I was gonna get asked the question. I thought I was gonna get asked a question about a case. And I said, you know, the tragedy of American energy policy education is the sum total of energy education in America is basically one Schoolhouse Rock video from 1978. Remember it? Energy. Think about it. How many other public education campaigns had you ever seen? So we actually launched an initiative to do a very straightforward, animated, now it was course 2020 style, and at that point 2018 style. We got Minecraft animator type representational animators. We put together scripts, and we developed an Energy 101 series. What's interesting is, because of the way bureaucracy works, that program had to actually be done outside of DOE. Life Powered was glad to do it. And so we have a now about to be 8-part series. None of these videos are longer than 5 minutes. Most of them are like 90 seconds. I thought, given the situation we're in today, I would show you video 6 in the series. But remember, lifepower.org has all of these videos, this animated series, and of course a lot of other videos like the first one we had. So let's show that real quick.
What's made the air we breathe safe while energy and economic needs have grown? Let's look at how environmental science and technology made it all happen. Decades ago, studies revealed that our air was becoming unsafe. Pollution from factories and power plants rose steeply while trying to meet the needs of our growing population. Air pollutants like particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides cause dense amounts of smog and acid rain. Starting in the 1960s and 70s, the United States developed pollution control technologies for a wide range of sources, including power plants, and passed laws to set air quality standards. The result? We were able to grow our economy with cheap and reliable electricity sources like coal and natural gas, while at the same time, reduce pollution levels so dramatically that the vast majority of our country's air is now among the safest in the world. With our power plants and factories now much cleaner, only a few areas in our country still struggle with air quality. These spots are stuck with pollution generated outside of the United States. Southern California, for example, receives significant pollution from nations thousands of miles away. The pollution is carried by air currents across the ocean and deposited in the United States. U.S. manufacturers spend significant time and resources protecting human health and the environment. Most of these polluting countries have weak environmental and labor standards, leading to unfair trade advantages. The end result? We export jobs and import pollution. This unstable dynamic could become much worse if domestic policies increase the price of energy in our manufacturing sector. The good news is that American air is already safe, and we can export our pollution control technology and cleaner fuels, such as low-sulfur coal and oil and clean-burning natural gas. America's energy and technology exports will help developing nations move millions of their citizens out of energy poverty and grow their economies dramatically. Our environmental achievements over the past 50 years serve as a model to the world as we strive to keep our air safe, while energy use expands to power our ever more interconnected lives.
So you see that vision of the future, that where we are not just a geopolitical power, manager, protecting not just our citizens but the world, but actually helping bring hundreds of millions of people out of energy poverty and improving their environment. It's exactly what Todd said. I'm sure Scott will double down on that theme. That's really an important thing. And I'm telling you, when people hear about this, when they know more about it, it changes the game in terms of how they perceive unbelievable statements like we're not going to drill anymore. Or, oh my God, we're not going to unleash our natural gas on the developing world. That would be unethical. It's crazy to think, and I don't mean that term in a derogative or a clinical sense. It is just absolutely disarming our own economy to no end. So here's a little last scary thoughts before I close. All of the buzz around geopolitics in Ukraine, I would have thought would have resulted in the administration pushing pause on a massive regulatory assault. But that's not happening. Unfortunately for America, maybe fortunately for lawyers, They are unleashing another wave of environmental regulation. It's like Groundhog Day. It's like 2015 all over again. Cross-state air pollution rule. Defeated that rule. It was held illegal. They've revamped it and bringing it back. And it would single-handedly not only retire probably half of the coal fleet in the US, it's going to start regulating and forcing the electrification of gas pipeline compressors. I mean, they're doing things with laws that never even were envisioned. CO2 regulation, just argued in front of the United States Supreme Court. We hopefully get a good opinion out of that. Other coal regs, the methane regulation. You do the methane rule right, you set an example for the world. You do it wrong, you potentially make the world a much more dangerous place. So stay tuned on that one. Mercury and air toxics, regional haze. You remember those slides about how our air had achieved these unprecedented clean levels? Well, those levels are the most stringent in the world. You know what this administration is trying to do? Make those levels even more stringent. Because fossil fuel has proven that you can meet those levels. And the orthodoxy of extreme environmentalism doesn't want to accept that. And that is an important aspect of this education campaign. So, I'm a big supporter of strategies that mitigate CO2 emissions because it's a hedge against climate-related risk, but also a hedge against regulatory risk. And we can do it in a win-win way. But it needs to be done in a smart and well-paced way. Todd talked about it. I know Scott will as well. But let me make sure that from a power lawyer's perspective, everybody gets one thing straight, and you tell everybody you know. You zero out the entire carbon footprint of the United States electric grid. No gas plants, no coal plants. And you're not moving the needle even a little bit. This is modeling based on the IPCC's methodologies. This is not climate science debate. This is accepting all the linkages between man-made emissions and global impacts. This is just a quantification of what the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere will be with and without the United States as a footprint. The world needs our technology and our fuels, not our ideology, if it's going to be anti-energy. And this tells that whole story. And I guarantee you, Scott's going to have a robust amount of information to explain why that is. But from a power plant perspective, this is a fun little website to go to, okay? It's carbonbrief.org. It's an environmental website, fair warning. And you can click on that little slider, and you can see how many hundreds of new coal plants aren't just being planned, are being built, and how the United States coal fleet's being systematically eliminated. And trust me, coal without carbon mitigation is not part of the future, but it will be, because hundreds and thousands of power plants in places that desperately need that energy have already been built, and the Indians and Chinese and Vietnamese and Pakistan, they're not going to do without them. We're going to absolutely want them to build natural gas if we're allowed to export our natural gas, right? But the world is dominated by this coal fleet that needs to have solutions that do not involve America preaching. They involve America developing technologies and showing them how to do it. Last thing I'll say, because this is definitely in Scott's lane, and then I'll step out of it and let him fill it. The world is about to go through is already in the process of an extraordinary urbanization. We don't see this, but just to give you some sense, if you take the IEA data, the world is going to move people into cities the size of roughly 12 New York cities each year for 30 years. I know that sounds hard to put your head around, but that is absolutely what's happening. And when that happens, we need energy. Cities are not made with pixie dust. They're made with steel and materials made from oil and gas, steel made from coking coal, and they're powered by fuels that can bring abundant and affordable electricity. So who's going to supply that, just to bring it all back to geopolitics? Are we going to help the rest of the world have a stable energy policy? Are we going to relinquish our role in that and let hostile nations take over? The big story to me, other than the human tragedy associated with Ukraine, is the story of China in the midst of this process. What I don't want to see is my son or anybody's son or daughter having to engage in international conflicts with a country that is positioning itself quite well in terms of geopolitical mineral advantage when we can do it right here. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for being a supporter of this industry, of energy generally, and go to livepower.org, and I'll hand the mic back over to our next expert, and I look forward to hearing what Scott has to say. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Ernie LaFleur. I'm with Oil Technology Group and also a member of the Chamber Energy Committee and an organizer of the Energy Summit. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce, I think, one of the real leaders in energy policy and analysis in the world, and that's Dr. Scott Tinker. I'm also very happy to see Scott here today since he's been dodging the storms that we all went through last night. He just made it here from Houston and making it through all those storms. So I'd like to give Scott a little round of applause for just making it. Scott is distinguished in so many ways. I can't list the countless awards that he's received. But he's your state geologist. He leads the 250-person Bureau of Economic Geology, which is doing some of the most world-class research on energy and other geoscience issues in the world. As a lifelong geologist myself, I can certainly say I certainly appreciate the wonderful work they do. And in addition to that, he's also an endowed chair, the all-day endowed chair at the Jackson School of Geosciences. He co-produced and is featured in the award-winning documentary film Switch. If any of you haven't seen it, you certainly want to see that, or his newest film, Switch On. That film has now been screened in 50 countries with more than 15 million viewers, and is used on thousands of campuses worldwide. I mean, Scott is really leading the way in energy education on campuses and school, which is so desperately needed. Dr. Tinker formed and serves as chairman of the nonprofit Switch Energy Alliance, and he's been invited to speak at hundreds of times per year somewhere in the world to audiences of all kinds as he works to bring industry, government, academia, and non-governmental organizations together to address major societal challenges in energy, environment, and economy. So please join me in giving Scott a warm Texas welcome as he talks about energy transition and the opportunities for Texas.
All right. Can you hear me? Good. Good to see everybody. I mean, it's really good to see everybody. That was quite a drive. A prayer goes out to the folks in Crockett. I just drove through there. A big tornado hit last night. Houses were gone. Huge trees on top of power lines. A big emergency effort going on down there right now. We got bird dogs down. We train them near there in Crockett, too. And if you see two golden retrievers flying by, grab them, pull them in and send them home. Anyway, it was a big deal. A lot of weather going on. So it's good to be here. Actually, nice to have made it, and appreciate Mike Nasi. Mike told you everything I was going to tell you, I think. And so, Mike, thank you. We'll see if we cover some of that. I do have a lot of new stuff to share with you today, so if we could get those first slides. Let's talk about Texas, but look at the globe as we do it. I love Yogi Berra. He's my favorite philosopher. If the world was perfect, it wouldn't be. And we all know that. We don't have a perfect world, but if you think about this globe, and I've been showing these things, about 11 of them, for quite a while now, some big issues facing our world. Most people would agree. Everything colored in orange relates to the economy in some way or to poverty. They're massive issues, and of course energy sits here as well. And so does climate change, and a lot of people want to paint that as climate or energy. Which side are you on? And it's really not. let's add the land, the air, and the water, the things most of us learned about were important in the environment as well. So we have the environment and energy. They work together, they have to. We're going to talk about that. My wife actually has a degree in food science, which means she knows what food is. So every time I sneak that bowl of ice cream, it's not without a little bit of guilt at night. I do it anyway. But enter kale. You know, kale has all the things. I like kale and salads and soups, and it has lots of nutrients and stuff, but it's not very dense. I'd have to eat a lot of kale to get all the kilocalories I need every day, right? So enter cow. I love cow too, you know. Maybe you don't, I don't know. I don't really care, but protein. Protein's good for me, I like it. Has some things in it that maybe aren't so good, but it's dense. I could get enough kilocalories out of cow alone every day, but it might not be that great for me, right? So is it good kale and bad cow? Is it team herbivore against team carnivore? You know, what do we got going on here? How about the poor omnivores in the world? Those of us who like it all. And the reality is, a diverse food mix gives you a pretty balanced diet, or you supplement with other things, right? And don't forget a little ice cream along the way. We all have to enjoy things. So there's local solutions to cow. We have some right here in Texas. I passed some beautiful farms on my way up here from Houston this morning. And there's local solutions to kale. This is Farmer John, who I spent some time with in Africa. He's got a solar panel, running a pump, lifting water, irrigating his backyard now, and he sells to local markets. It's a new source of income for him, but we're dense. A lot of people in the world. So local solutions won't get it all. We have to have dense cow, dense livestock, and dense kale. And that impacts the environment. When you think about it, and you think about all that has to go on to grow the food for food, or to grow the food we eat directly, there's fertilizers, and there's pesticides and herbicides, there's soil depletion and runoff, and you got irrigation and things that we have, water challenges and methane and CO2. One of the biggest sources of human methane is actually agriculture, just as much as the power sector. It damages the environment. Agriculture hurts the environment. So I had a big idea the other day. I think we should just end food. You know, let's just get rid of it. It hurts the environment. Let's can it, so to speak. You know, we're all laughing. We're smiling. We're not going to end food. But we do need to work to continue to clean it up at large scale. And this is the dual challenge between energy and environment for food. There's impacts and there's benefits from it. Now, energy isn't the only thing we need for ourselves. I'll give you a little Dr. Seuss moment here. This took a while to do, so if you don't appreciate it, fake it. So here we go. Our homes and our phones, our pets and our jets, our heaters and our beaters, we need energy. Our water, our daughters, our sons, and everything they put on their faces. Packs and our snacks, our games and our frames. We have paste and waste that we use energy for, our lights and our sight, our noses and our clothes and our wheels and our meals. Everything in the world depends on energy. Everything. Now, lights and food and water and homes, we take it for granted. Every single day. We just take it for granted, but most people in the world don't. This little girl I met down outside of Quito, she told me her dreams on the bed where she sleeps with her parents, no mattress, dirt floor, open air, one light. Tied a friendship bracelet on me. I never took it off until it literally fell off. This grandfather I met in Ethiopia is my age. He had tears in his eyes when he was telling me his grandkids would have things he never had because they're in school for the first time. And they're all in the second grade because they'd never been in school before. In Vietnam, we visited Thon, who lives in this shack. She has a wind turbine. See it? It's 3 frying pans that spin around and run a fan. She carries her crippled son across that plank so she can get him to school every morning. Every single morning. And in Kenya, light bulbs are dangling from the ceiling of a school that doubles as a church. And for the first time they're in school, and these kids come in their uniforms, and they cross mounds of garbage and polluted water, bad soil. I've been in 60 countries in the world. I've been fortunate. Without exception, the worst environments of the world are where it's poor. Every time. They just can't afford to clean it up. And in Nepal, Sanukanchi is cooking indoors with wood, like she and 3 billion other people in the world still do today. Dung, hay, straw, coal, other forms of biomass. And in the Seni Memorial Hospital nearby, kids die every week from lung disease, from breathing the particulates in those homes. It's like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And the mothers are dying of cancer and getting cataracts and other diseases. It kills 3 million people every year, indoor smoke. That's what COVID killed in 2020. We shut down the world's economy for that. Every year. So when we brought her an electric cooktop, she had a huge smile. She said, "I can't read," in double translation, but my daughter can. She'll teach me how to use it. And we go down to South America and Colombia, and these kids in the Arhuaco village of Gunchuqua, half of them will die before they reach adulthood of things that won't kill us. Dysentery, a tooth infection. They just don't have access to the things we do. They're coming in from the agrarian hills now and beginning to get into schools. And we spent 8 days and brought First Solar there and filmed it. It's in our film Switch On. It's a pretty powerful thing. You zoom in, you see the solar panels on the left. It's about half what you would put on at your house to power those 7 mud huts and thatch roofs with lights and a ceiling fan and a refrigerator freezer. And a light in the village center the last night when we flipped the switch. This is the mama or the chief. It was one of the most meaningful moments of my life because they'd never seen each other at night in their own village except over a fire. It's the first time a whole community could see one another. Now look, there's 3 kinds of people in the world. Those who are good at math and those who aren't. So, which of the 3 are you? So let's do some simple arithmetic. You know, here's Ethiopia and Kenya, some countries. This is the amount of energy a person consumes in a year in these countries. If you don't speak kilowatt hour, here's my fridge. 9 times more for my fridge than a person in Ethiopia, 3 times more than a Kenyan. That's energy poverty, okay? And how is it related to economic poverty? Very closely. Severe economic poverty across the bottom goes higher to the right, and severe energy poverty higher up. Africa, about 1.2 billion people now, severely impoverished economically and with energy. There's places that have it, but in the aggregate. Asia, a lot more people, a little less severe poverty. When I say severe, $3 a day total. That's economic poverty. Some a little less energy poverty. In Latin America, better, but still some. And you see this really strong trend between access to energy and coming out of economic poverty. But it presents a paradox or a dilemma. Energy won't end poverty, but I can't get out of poverty without energy. We have to start to think about powering the people in the world, or this disparity will continue to grow and nothing else matters. Poverty drives the global conversations. So here's a map of the world's income. And the yellow and the red is really poor. Yellow the most and red next. And you can see it's emerging. This is emerging. And all the people I've just talked about live in different places in the world, and they're trying to get their kids to school. Lights in schools, and first time out of dirt homes, and coming out of the bush, literally, carrying their kids on their back and getting first electricity. And they're scattered across largely subequatorial regions, but all around the world, this challenge exists. They need affordable energy. They need to get started with something, okay? Now, in the developing world, the purples and pinks up there, they have energy, but it's not reliable. It's not always on. And we like our energy on, so they need reliable energy. And then, you know, you think about this, 4 out of every 5 people in the world today live in these emerging and developing economies, 4 out of 5. US and Europe are just about 580 million people. We're like less than 7% of the world's population. The US and Western Europe combined. We're not the dominant force in terms of people anymore. But look at the blue, the developed world, the rich countries, us. It's not that broadly scattered, and we want it clean. We want it clean. And what does clean mean? You know, if you think about clean air, Mike showed this map. Where is it clean? Where is it green and yellow? Where it's rich. Where is it dirty? Where it's poor? Every single time, water, soils, etc., even cleaning up the atmospheric emissions, where you have an economy that can afford to do it. The transition in the world isn't one big transition. It's all these little transitions that are happening based on your geopolitics and your education levels, your economy, your access to resources of different kinds. Come back to our food. There's low-density energies, hydro, solar, wind, batteries. They have a purpose. And there's high-density energy, coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear. Call them renewable, call them fossil, and nuclear. Just like a balanced diet matters, guess what? A balanced energy mix matters too. When you think about this, we got to bring these things together. That's what provides energy security. And energy security is what every leader on the planet wants for their people. Country, state, companies, secure energy. We've got to strive to be both completely factual and factually complete. I said this to the U.S. Senate in testimony about a year ago, and there's a difference. So let's take a look at the big chill here in Texas about a year ago. Here's the data for the month of February of 21. My slides are always color-coded the same. I'm going to tear these apart, but here's the weather. That's the temperature in Dallas, highs and lows, and it got cold, below freezing highs and lows, and we had blackouts in the second half of that. Okay, that's the data. Let's look closely at it. There's the demand for energy, actually what we consumed. It went up from its winter normals, 39,000 megawatt hours, to over 55. And then it went down in the blackouts and came back down to, quote, normal. So it kind of did this thing. Let's look at it. Here's nuclear. Nuclear was chugging along at full tilt, and then it went offline a little bit as one pump in South Texas project froze and it couldn't circulate. They had to shut down a reactor. So it kind of did this. Here's coal. Chugging along, full tilt, every reactor we had, and then some piles froze and it went down, and so it kind of did this. We don't use the sun in the summer or in the winter much. It's cloudy. Days are short. Sun's lower on the horizon. A lot of reasons. Solar isn't very efficient in the winter, and hydro as well, but what was there went lower, if that's possible, for the solar in the winter time here. Kind of went away. Here's the wind, chugging along normal, and wind is about 50% of its capacity in Texas in the winter. We refurbish and work on the turbines at that time because the demand for electricity isn't as high in Texas in the winter. It's higher in the summer when we're running our air conditioners. So it's not expected to be as high, but it went low. You know, a lot of turbine blades got ice on them and weren't usable. So it kind of did this, dropped quite a bit and came back. And here's natural gas. Natural gas did something different. It went up 275% day on day for 6 days, and then it fell. Line freezing and power to the infrastructure, some of it froze up. And you'll hear that there was a 40% or plus or minus drop in gas, and it's the primary issue. The FERC said that. Some folks at the University of Texas at Austin have said that, and many other places. They looked at the blackout window and said, look at that big drop in gas. That's the problem. Well, that's interesting, because gas did this, and I'm kind of struggling when I look at the whole demand and start layering on top of this thing. There's solar, there's our nuclear, there's our wind and coal, and here's gas. It's completely factual that gas fell 40% in the blackout, but is that the whole story? Shouldn't we widen our aperture a little bit? What happened the 6 days before? Well, it more than almost 2x from what it normally does. And yeah, it fell, but is this factually complete? And should we begin to think about factual completeness as we address these things? And the other piece of this is the cost. You'll hear, and completely factual, that solar and wind are now cheaper than coal and gas. Well, there's coal and gas price. This is called the levelized cost of electricity. Sounds levelized, doesn't it? It's not really levelized. I'll tell you why. But here's some other forms. You got your onshore wind, your offshore wind coming down and going below now. Solar, tracking, solar has gone below, and the fixed axis is kind of right in there, and there's batteries even coming way down. It's all getting pretty close to the same price, some lower. So it's completely factual that the LCOE is less. But what is LCOE? That's the cost of electricity at the plant gate, at the turbine or the panel or this power plant. That's what it costs there. Where does it have to go to be useful? To you. So we've got to deliver that somehow, and that's when some more costs come in, because if it's intermittent, I have to have something to back it up that sits there redundant, a battery or a power plant, mostly natural gas, to follow that load and deliver reliable electricity. And that's expensive when that happens. So completely factual and factually complete. There's a difference, and it's hard to be factually complete. You got to look at a lot of stuff, and it doesn't always agree with you, and the damn data gets in the way, and it interrupts my morning feeds that I like to read, and I don't want to read that, and it bothers me. But we've got to do it, because here's the actual cost of electricity in every state in the country. Who pays the most? Well, California and the Northeast. Who pays the least? Texas and others. That's the cost almost to you. Okay, that's retail cost. And it matters. Ask Europe right now, the people, what they're paying for electricity. It's not LCOE. It's a lot. So what could be done to avoid a repeat of the existing, using the existing infrastructure, and what do we do in the future? And I've watched and read with great interest. I wrote something really early on this and then just stopped. I just watched with interest how we've tried to handle this in Texas. And a lot of you are political leaders here. Well, get off your politics, all right? It's time to serve Texans and the country. Enough posturing. Let's look at all the data and get this right for the future. I think gas has a little role to play myself. It's what the data are showing me, and there's challenges with other things. We come back globally and say the same thing. Well, look here's the global energy in the world. This is our transition. Coal and oil are going up still. Why? They're dense. A lot of CO2 when you burn them. Gas and nuclear are going up at a rate faster than coal and oil. That's a completely factual statement. At a rate. And they're dense, and they're less CO2. And hydro continues to rise, and solar and wind are getting started. They're growing at a fast rate. They're not dense, and they have limited CO2. And you'll hear this completely factual statement. Solar and wind are going faster than anything else. It's true. Look at them. Look at their rate. Your kids learn this in school, I promise. Right here in Tyler, and Dallas, and Houston, and Crockett. Fastest growing rate. But what's missing to make this factually complete? What's missing? Let's scale it. Let's scale them the same. Here we go. Remember, it's right there in the data. So although they're growing really fast, they're just a little teeny wedge still of global energy because we consume so much. They're not even close to keeping up with the growth in demand for energy globally because we consume so much energy in the world. So when we look at it now by type, let's lump coal and oil and gas and nuclear, three colors. It turns out we've grown more coal and oil, since 1965 than all the gas, nuclear, and renewables combined. That's not a rate, that's the actual numbers, that's the generation. It's important. And why? Well, because it's affordable and reliable. We built our economy on coal. So did the UK, so did Germany, so is China and Vietnam. And it matters what India is thinking about doing too, doesn't it? So when you look now by region, we see North America and Europe have flattened our energy consumption. We're starting to come down some. Asia's growing tremendously. And the rest of the world is just getting started. All the ones living in poverty and starting to emerge are just getting started with their energy consumption. Asia is being driven by population growth. India and China alone represent 1 out of every 3 people on the planet. Over 2.5 billion people in 2 countries. Okay? Well, the CO2 emissions shouldn't surprise us. Guess who's flat and coming down? We are. Pat yourselves on the back, I guess. Who's going up? Asia, way up. And the rest of the world in emissions just getting started because of coal. Here's China's coal. It was growing steadily and then it went way up again. And that's policy. Here's the rest of China's energy. Combined, it doesn't equal their coal. This isn't for power, this is total energy. And here's the CO2 emissions in China. Obviously, they're going up, they're burning coal. It's affordable and reliable to them. And the chairman says, climate targets aren't going to interrupt my energy security. This was pre-Russia. Don't blame Ukraine on this. That's a whole different level of tragedy. And I visited Kiev in '82 after college to the Soviet Union. It makes me cry. It's a tragedy that's playing out over there. But this isn't the reason for this. Okay? That's the most important slide I'm going to show you. Let's work it together. The yellow are the rich countries, us, the OECD, and the green color is going to be the less rich countries, the non-OECD. Above that red line in the middle means you consume more stuff than you produce. And if you're below it, it means you produce more stuff than you consume. So the United States, we consume more stuff than we produce, and we make about 5 billion tons of CO2 put in the atmosphere every year doing it. China makes 10 billion tons of CO2, but they produce more stuff than they consume. Most of the non-OECD are producers, and most of the rich countries are consumers. So what's happening? We are saying, hey, producers, send us our stuff. Look at your labels on your clothes. Look at anything in your life. Where is it made today? Why? Because we want it cheap. What are we effectively sending them? Our CO2. We're saying, hey, you use the coal, you make the CO2, we'll be green, life is good. Is that a climate policy? Is that zero emissions? Really? Companies are doing this? States are doing this? How many atmospheres are there in the world? Oh crap, there's just one, you know? And it's really efficient at spreading CO2 and methane and everything else around, isn't it? This won't address climate change, this offset scheme. Good intentions. These guys had good intentions. They were putting in these posts, keep people from parking next to the building. they forgot where they parked, right? And you political leaders, you put in posts too. They're policy posts. And you hate to remove them because you'll be called a flip-flopper or whatever. Pull them out. If you get a post in that it's a good intention, forget judging. It's a good intention. We tried this. It didn't work. Let's end this policy. And all you in the public, support them doing that. I don't care which party you're in. It's called learning. When did we stop learning? Try something, doesn't work, try something else. Data must be used to tell the truth, not to call to action, no matter how noble the intentions. This was buried in the last chapter in a paragraph of Hans Rosling's wonderful book, Factfulness, if you haven't read it. Not to call to actions. So let's talk a little bit about this. The climate matters. It is important. It's going to have impact. But so does the air and the water and the land. These things, they're very interactive. They work together. They're very interconnected. And if you work too hard on one thing, you could hurt the others. You've got to think about the whole of the environment as we move forward. So we've got our clean and dirty energy. That's what your kids are learning. And is the dirty stuff dirty? Yeah, it's dirty. It does a lot of good things for us, including making us wealthy so we can clean it up, right? 60 countries. But look at the thing. You got to manufacture, mine, and drill. Our first film, Switch, we showed the pros and cons. We went to a massive coal mine. We showed hydraulic fracking with a K. You know, we showed nuclear power in France and what you do with the waste and a big coal plant. This is the Parrish plant that powers a good chunk of Houston. Has environmental impacts. Let's look at the clean stuff. Oh, wait, same thing. You have to mine for metals and copper. This is a mine picture I took up in Montana. We'll zoom in to give you a feeling for scale. That's a drilling rig and a big front end loader across that pit. Have you ever seen a lithium mine? This is in Australia. And we do it at the surface in South America as well. That's a town next to it. Have you ever seen the floor bed of a Tesla S? How many drive a Tesla S? Oh, come on. Quit being chickens. It's a great vehicle. The motor's really efficient. It's awesome. That's the fuel. There's 7,000 batteries in that car, bigger than your cell phone each one. Let's do some arithmetic. 7,000 times 1.4 billion vehicles in the world. We're being told we're going to electrify half of them in the next 20 plus years. 4.9 trillion batteries. 4.9 trillion batteries. We have tens of billions for our gadgets today. How long would it take to make 4.9 trillion batteries bigger than your cell phone? Well, if I could make 250,000 of them every minute, 24/7, 365, it'd take 37 years for half the world's vehicle fleet to be Tesla S's. That's a nice big car. Some are smaller, some are supposed to be bigger. And what happens to them when they wear out? I know you all take your batteries to the recycle bin diligently, and here's my batteries. Where's your phone go? Okay. Where's it go? And how about these solar panels? I visited these in southern Spain over a decade ago. It's amazing facilities. PV it's remarkable now and getting more efficient. But where do they go? And where are they made? They're made in big polysilicon manufacturing plants or chemical things. They're toxic, just like batteries. Where do they go when they wear out? They go where these things go. This is about 100 wind turbine blades being cut into thirds and buried in Wyoming. They're inert, but they're big. That's a huge tractor up there. 100 turbine blades. Texas has 40,000 turbine blades, and they're wearing out. We don't recycle. Working on it, hard. Why don't we recycle and reuse? It's expensive. It's just cheaper to make stuff new. Nonetheless, here's our electric car. Says it on the license plate, electrons. It's awesome. It's being charged with diesel. It's a diesel generator to make electricity to charge a battery. I mean, I think we've lost the thread sometimes, but this happens at a different scale. Here's our electric vehicles in the world. We've got about 15 million of them so far. The red is China. Where's China get its electricity? Altogether, coal. Is that clean, CO2-wise? No, I mean, it matters what you're charging with. The forecast is we're going to go from 15 to 55 in 3 years. And on the right is the number of charging connections forecast for the world. Let's put our forecasted electric vehicles to scale here. They fit neatly in there. And that's going to 650 million. That's half of the vehicle fleet. 300 million chargers, half the vehicle fleet, 5 trillion batteries that wear out. We got to start to think about these things. It's going to take some lithium. That's our total lithium production in the world today. Here's where it's supposedly going to head. That's non-trivial. But the demand is going to be twice that, which means it's going to get expensive and volatile as any commodity does when demand exceeds supply. These are commodities, okay? Transportation, yeah, EVs they're cool. They make good sense in dense cities. Charge it, drive 3 miles for 45 minutes, however long it takes you to get to work. Plug it in that night. Small vehicles, good, because less weight is battery. As you start to get bigger vehicles, more weight becomes the battery. Maybe fuel cells make sense again, hydrogen. It's a pretty neat technology. George W. Bush was pushing it pretty hard, rightfully. And the big vehicles, it's still liquids. I am not going to fly on a plane across the Atlantic that's run on batteries. I mean, I'm not going to, and it's never going to exist. Maybe I could, and the whole rest of the plane would be batteries. But Elon doesn't fly his rockets on batteries. Okay. hydrogen and other kinds of dense fuels. Nonetheless, our car owner in Colorado loves no oil, the Tesla. I guess they don't have plastic in the car or tires. Remember, we don't know these things. So I love mining. Colorado loves mining. A proud tradition. Are we going to bring it back? We're going to need to. So it's a conundrum, isn't it? The sun and the wind are renewable, but panels, thermals, batteries are not renewable. Here's the secret. There's no renewable energy. Make sure to tell your kids. There's no renewable energy. We've learned this word. It sounds cool. But it all comes from the earth, gets made, and gets dumped back in the earth when it wears out, and we do it again. It's not renewable. Okay? Takes a lot of stuff. Here's the cement and the glass, metals and steel and other stuff. Because it's low density, and again, this isn't judgmental. I'm not judging load. It's physics. Hundreds of times denser. Because it is, it takes more stuff to collect it and convert it into forms that we use. And that makes sense in some places. But the reality of this is all large-scale energy systems have large-scale environmental impacts. Humans impact the environment. Newsflash. We've got to work on this dual challenge, and we've got to understand it all to do it well. Who owns all this stuff? Well, it's mined here. These are the top 3 countries for each of these important metals and rare earths. That's where it's mined or produced. Who processes it? Oh, China. China controls processing globally now. They've done it quietly, with money and intent. Okay? Most people don't know how gasoline is made or where electricity comes from. And I've been saying this for a long time, and it's a great dilemma. But they think they do. And they vote. Okay? So, Exhibit A, getting on a plane, people versus fossil fuels on the backpack. You gotta vote with your feet. If you don't like fossil fuels, don't get on Southwest Airlines. Walk. Or ride your bike, or do something to show your commitment to that pledge. We have to start to get a little bit more honest. So our total energy supply, the IEA, I'm not sure they know where gasoline comes from. Fatih Birol is a smart economist. He runs it, but they came out with a net zero emissions report last year. They took oil, gas, and coal 75% down to 25% by 2050. Bioenergy was going to replace it, and solar and wind up 1,000%, growing the population of the world at a reasonable pace and the world's economy at a reasonable pace to $300 trillion. Now, every time the economy and people have grown, look what's happened. We have used more energy. That's a pretty decent correlation, sort of causative. No, they said this time we're going to not use more energy. The world will consume less energy. And they explained 10% of it in the report. I had to, Lee Tillman called me when this came out and said, come talk to my board. When? This week. About what? This report. I got to read it. Here it is. But they didn't explain all that. This wedge, I'm going to call energy intensity gap, energy per unit product. It's magic. There's magic now. Magic energy. I want some. So I wrote a piece called The Road to Glasgow is Paved with Bad Assumptions. I think Fatih Birol actually was putting this out to show this is going to be really hard. And then COP26 used it as a roadmap. What? And there were a lot more things in it than that. So here was mine from a long time ago. This is a 25% renewable by 2065. There's energy demand. I made it lower. Let's get some efficiency in it. All the new energy needed would come from non-oil, gas, and coal, nuclear on up. More than enough. Some policy for coal, a lot of policy for these things. Is it? And everybody says this is business as usual. Is it? Exact same data, this is in units, in percentage terms, the energy mix. Here it is. Exact same data. You see coal and oil getting cut in half, nuclear and natural gas doubling, renewables going up fourfold. Why? Carbon, hydrocarbons, methane, hydrogen, uranium and thorium. This decarbonization transition has been going on very naturally because of denser forms of energy. We might need to accelerate it, but why do we need that mix out there? Because you have to have something that's there all the time to complement the things that aren't there all the time. To make them what? Reliable. Okay? Resilient. And there's a lot of oil and gas in that future. A lot. Where's that all going to come from? Well, this is the production of oil in the U.S., and here's our imports, and there's our exports, none, and then what happened? Shale happened. Shale gas and then shale oil. We doubled our production, cut our imports in half, and increased our exports. It's a phenomenal story that can only be killed temporarily by policy. As a result of that, the price of gas, which was going up, and volatile, look what the price of gas did after the Great Recession of '09. It saved our economy. It underpins so many things in our economy. And at a low price, January this year, $3.50, who knows where it's going to go? It depends on lots of things. And what else started to happen? These companies that were risking everything in shale and being pretty wasteful, many of you may be in that business, you were losing a lot of money. This is hundreds of billions of dollars, the big shale players, but started to make some money. And the forecast now, oh, by the way, ESG investing, which I won't talk about today, I talked about that yesterday in Houston. You can be pretty ESG-y when the energy industry is losing a lot of money. I wouldn't invest in that. I'm an ESG. But look what's happened, and now we're going to see an industry making money, and all the ESG investors are sort of back. That's not such a bad thing. We can make it clean. It's a fascinating conversation when you start to watch the dynamics. And the investment in the oil and gas sector is forecast to be higher than it was. And it should be. It needs to be. So it's the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Wouldn't it be great if we could have civil dialogues again? Entertain some thoughts. You don't have to accept it, but let's just talk about some of these challenging things, like reducing CO2. It needs today's technology, it needs a reasonable price, and it needs to be scalable if we're going to meet climate challenges in the time frames needed. Three big things that has to happen. What can do that? Not that much. Turns out efficiency can help, more with less. Natural gas replacing coal, like we've done in the US, can help a lot globally. Nuclear could help, small modular reactors. Carbon capture and storage is a big wedge that's useful. Some EVs, some hydrogen, some gasoline and diesel. Geothermal, Texas has some. Hydro, centralized wind and solar. These are it. There's your wedges. Not great magic. And look at what Texas has in front of it. Almost all of it. Biofuels, maybe not so much. We don't have a lot of topography and rainfall, except extremely on occasion, like last night. But look at all the other things Texas can do. This is the shale gas basins in the world, or in the country. The big red circle is what's there, what's in the tank. See the little teeny circle at the bottom of the stack, the inverted snowman? That's what's been produced so far, with all the drilling from the big circle. Look at the Marcellus. And out in West Texas, there's a lot of natural gas along with that oil, a lot. Not much has been produced yet. It's the reason we're exporting gas in this country. LNG, liquefied natural gas, we're exporting because we have it, and Europe is asking for it. It's hard to ramp it up instantly. Technology, less than 5% of the gas has been produced. 95% is still there. We'll never get all of it, but there's still a pretty big target. How about hydrogen or CO2? These are all the emitters in Texas, and there's a lot of them. We make a lot of CO2 in Texas, more than our fair share, because we make more than our fair share of stuff, and we send it where? Oh, to California, because they're green, but they need our stuff. So it's interesting how it kind of plays out on lots of different levels. And here's the carbon hub thinking in Texas. We've got a lot of enhanced oil recovery fields, the green dots. Got a big sediment pile offshore where we could put the CO2. A lot of data to look at that. In fact, we've got decades of storage of CO2. And the GLO has permitted one company to begin looking at offshore storage of CO2. And there's onshore as well. It's a big industry, huge volumes, a lot of money. And hydrogen as well. What's hydrogen? Well, it's the lightest element on the table. It doesn't float around. You got to make it, split water or methane. But here's our storage. We don't store energy very well. So flywheels and other things. Here's our batteries. And what this is showing is the discharge duration against the power you can get. Here's compressed air and pumped hydro. These are better, but look at this. A lot of power and a lot of duration from hydrogen, if we could store it. Probably our best big battery in the world. We've got a huge consortium we just kicked off at the Bureau for storing hydrogen. It's not easy. It's lighter than helium, which floats our balloons. But Texas has a huge opportunity here, a lot of places to potentially store hydrogen. So we come back to this transition. There it is, yet there are still people who say, nope, wind, solar, and biofuels only. That's the answer, and if you don't think that, you're a denier of something. I don't know what. Maybe of science or something. You know. The reality is they're a piece of the solution, but they're only a partial gate. It's about as effective as this gate, you know. Don't go in. Okay, well, maybe I will. You know. You got to have a lot of other things in this gate that we just talked about some, and Texas can do a lot of those things. So let's wrap this up. We've got cheap, reliable, and clean energy. It drives our behaviors. It's the economy for cheap, reliable energy, and clean is the environment. All four parts of the environment. They work together. They overlap quite a bit. Geologists love these triangle diagrams. Everything has to sum up to 100%. So in the economy, if it's cheap, volatile affordability, and the energy needs to be available, and or not some combination of intermittent, that makes it reliable. And clean sits up here, all four pillars. If you want 100% clean, you get 0% of everything else. And the reality is we've got to bring these together. I call it the radical middle. It's radically lonely most of the time, but it's where the data are and compromise and discussion, civil dialogue, entertaining thoughts. You can map coal. It's cheap and reliable. That's why we used it, and so is China. But to make it clean makes it more expensive. You can map solar and wind. They're pretty clean, but to make them reliable makes them more expensive. Okay? There's trade-offs. There's trade-offs in all these things. Back to our world poverty map. Watch Africa, the yellow and red. I'm going to fade it into the world at night. Look where the lights are on and look where they're off. They're not on where it's poor. Here's our energy mixes around the parts of the world, same color scheme, oil and coal in the dark green, etc. We're going to scale those to be proportional to consumption. That's where it's all consumed and where it's not. So now you can see where the lights are on and why. They have energy. We have energy. Some want to eliminate coal and oil. Keep it in the ground. It's still being said in Washington, D.C. Asia would lose 3/4, Africa 2/3. We're about halfway towards that, along with Europe, if you include natural gas and nuclear. Some want to get rid of natural gas and nuclear. What the hell's left? Okay. I mean, is Russia going to do that? I think Mr. Putin would sign on to that deal, don't you? Middle East? Sure. OPEC? You bet. Let's do that. And really, look at this. And not only is it not realistic, what happens if you darken the world's lights by 90%? Watch the map. Let's just turn down the lights 90%. Let's take everything in your world, and you can only keep 1 out of 10 things. Is that the future? It's the past. I'm going to turn the lights back on, okay? We're going to get energy to the world, energy access for all, because it addresses hunger and shelter and everything 1 billion people need today that have none. Education and health care for the first time in many places. Women going for the wood, cooking indoors, not getting to go to school when their male counterparts do. Disproportionately disadvantaged. Population growth is tied directly to education, really tightly, and energy. Immigration and migration, look what's happening today in the Ukraine. 3 million people leaving in a modern society. I never would have thought that would happen. The ability to invest in an environment with a healthy economy and mitigate and adapt climate change. These are the complexities, these are the big issues. You bring all that together, and it actually begins to address, can you hear that? That's my time. Dun, 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 dun. Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off. It's my daughter, should I get it? She's a junior in college. Hey, sweetie, talk to 500 people with me. Sorry. Here we are, energy and the environment, the dual challenge. And guess what? You know, nobody owns the truth. All we can do is seek it. Nobody owns the truth. Shaming is destructive. Happens all the time in this space. We've got to end that. We've got to be able to talk civilly. You have to address them both together, energy and the environment, or they both fail. It's not an either or. It's not simple, but it's solvable. And it's so important. It's not simple. It's not binary. Clean, dirty, good, bad, believer, denier. If you ever hear that, just say no. Nope, it's not simple, but it's solvable. And it's solvable if we kind of play as one team. Politically, globally, states, everybody. Environmentalists, energy, play as one team. I think that way we'll be able to better the world together. Thanks. I wish I would have had her on FaceTime and I would have turned the camera around. Look, they're clapping for me. Ernie just said we could take a couple of questions if you want to do that. So I'm happy to do that. I'm not elected, so I'll actually answer. I'll tell you exactly what I'm thinking. Not that elected people don't, but Ernie.
Could you talk about the carbon footprint of natural gas versus, quote, renewables, if you look at the total life cycle of those?
Life cycle analysis of natural gas for solar, wind, and other things, it varies. We got a huge study going on at the Bureau right now called Comparing Electricity Options, looking at solar, wind, batteries, and natural gas for just that and their cost. It's not easy. Life cycle depends. It depends on where you're getting the gas, how far you have to move it, where you're mining and moving your materials. Depends on how you use the natural gas, how you're using solar and wind. Solar in Seattle isn't very efficient, or Germany. The solar intensity is terrible, so it takes a lot more to collect it. In Texas and California, it's pretty high. Windy places are good, non-windy, not so good. So it's not a straightforward comparison. There's wedges. In general, solar and wind and batteries are going to put out less CO2 to the atmosphere life cycle than natural gas does. You have to make all the stuff for natural gas drilling and moving it and burning it, etc. So on a CO2 basis only, if that's your only measure, carbon, you're a little better off in general with solar and wind and batteries. But how about the land and the air and the water? Where does that all play in and how does it come together? And that's where you start to see differences. Low density forms of energy like solar and wind take a lot of land and a lot of mining and a lot of landfill dumping, and you have to do it over and over. Unlike dense energy, much less stuff, much less impact on the land, the air, and the water. So there's trade-offs. I think we have to leave this carbon-only dialogue. It's a piece, but it's not the only. That's like measuring my health by a calorie or a kilocalorie. How healthy am I? Purely on kilocalories. Well, let me smoke a few cigarettes, and it's just the calories that matter, right? So you can't have one measure of health of anything. And we've gotten ourselves into this carbon-only dialogue, which is really not the best place to be for our environment or our economy. Yes, sir?
So we like to fantasize about technology miracles.
Yeah.
If you had to fantasize, where do you think, you expect, you hope
Yeah. The question is, what are the technology miracles or black swans that could help address some of these sooner? I mean, there's a few big ones. Natural gas is a really versatile fuel. So you need it for running vehicles, CNG, hydrogen, making power, plastics, fertilizers. It's just used for everything. So that'll be in the world. We need molecules still. We can't do everything on electrons. We still need molecules. Fusion is getting closer than you think for nuclear. Fission, we split things to make heat and boil water, turbine, run a generator. Fusion does the same thing. It makes heat. It's closer than we think. I've seen some of the studies now. Fission, still pretty cool technology. The more modern versions are better in terms of using the waste and the heat from that over and over, so you'll end up with less volume and less heat. Small modular reactors. So rather than the gigawatt jobs, the 1,000 megawatt like we have over here at Comanche Peak or South Texas project, 50 megawatt or 100, a 20th or a 10th the size. You can put them small, modern technology, villages and towns. That's your base load. High upside there. And you're seeing other countries look real hard at it. We're lagging there, although our companies here are driving it, NuScale and others. Storage, energy storage is one of the big black swans. If we could store energy better, we could mitigate some of the intermittency of things. Storing energy is hard. It's just hard, You store it in potential energy mostly, pump water up a hill, compress some air, wind up a flywheel, charge a capacitor, store it as hydrogen. Chemical batteries, okay for storing, but that's a tough physics problem. We've been working on batteries a long time, getting better. Maybe sulfur batteries are coming, solid state batteries, people are working on those, and those could have big differences for us, less metals and longer charge rates, et cetera. So I think storage and dense electricity and versatility in molecules are the big areas I see for that. I could babble on technology until tomorrow, but I'll stop. Any other questions? Well, thanks for all you're doing. How many are in the energy business? When's the last time you were thanked? Okay. So thank you for being in the energy business. I used to be in it. My son's in it. My daughter-in-law's in it. If you get beat up, which you probably do sometimes, if you tell people what you actually do, just tell them, I'm in the energy business. I'm lifting the world out of poverty. What do you do? Okay.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the conclusion of our program, and your presence here is really appreciated. Thank you for your support for this great event. I'd also like to thank our sponsors once again for their contribution to making this possible. And thank you for our elected officials, and once again to our Energy Committee subcommittee that puts this summit together. A round of applause for everybody. Thank you once again to Mr. Staples, Mr. Nasi, and Dr. Tinker for educating us once again. And now I'd like to remind everyone that a rebroadcast of this presentation is available at the Chamber website. So please, later on, be looking for that, and maybe you can catch some bloopers or more additional information. As of now, Claude Figueroa, once again, it's been a pleasure being your host, and we are now dismissed. Y'all have a good day.